Hi everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be creating a watercolor card as well as an envelope that goes with it. And I'm starting out with some watercolor paper. This paper is from Fabriano. This is the Artistico Extra White. I like to use this watercolor paper in particular because of its color. It doesn't have that more cream shade like most watercolor papers do. In this case, it is a very bright white, and that's why I like to use it a lot. The watercolor paints I'm using today are from Magello. This is their 36 Mission Gold set, and I'm going to do some painting in kind of a brush stroke pattern here. I also wanted to mention that I taped down my watercolor paper to a hard board so that if I add a lot of water to this and the paper starts to bow up, that it's not going to warp the paper. As long as it's taped down while it dries, it will lessen any warping that might happen. So I'm taking each one of these colors with a watercolor brush here, and I'm doing a really loose brush stroke in a diagonal direction. And I want to make sure that as I move on to the later colors, that the color before is still wet. That makes it so the colors can blend together and those colors kind of dance on the page and get a nice blend. At this point, I decided to add some purple, and you'll notice that that pink area at the top was already starting to dry, so I don't get a nice transition of color between those two shades, but I still felt like it needed the purple up there, so I decided it's not perfect, but it will work. I finished off this brush stroke area with a bit of this blue, and that pretty much finishes all of the watercolor painting for this. So I let it dry, and I'm going to do some stamping. I'm using a stamp set from Mama Elephant called Oh Happy Day, and it has a really big sentiment stamp on that stamp set, and I thought it would be perfect over the top of this rainbow brush strokes area. So I've inked up my stamp with some Versamark ink and then pressed that down onto the watercolor paper. I'm now going to coat the stamping with some white embossing powder. This is some white embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. The color is called Alabaster, and I'm making sure it's on there as much as possible, a nice coating over all of that stamped area. I then took a heat tool and moved it over this entire area so that it melted all of that embossing powder. And I just melted it until the white shade really brightened up and it was smooth. I'm now going to take an anti-sag powder tool, which I should have used before I did any of the stamping before, but I forgot, because I'm going to do some additional stamping. I'm taking the smaller flower and leaf stamps from the same stamp set, and I'm going to add those to the bottom left and top right corner of the greeting. This just gives it a little bit more interest, and it also extends the white areas so that it fills more of that rainbow brushstroke background. And so after each one of these small stamps, I added the white embossing powder, just so I knew where it was located since I am using a clear ink. And then I was able to put the heat on it and heat it till it was completely melted. So I wanted to make sure I had a nice cluster of these images in those top corners so that it really extended the white area so it filled all of that rainbow background. It was a little bit too tall for this sentiment. Now I'm going to take some black cardstock from Gina K Designs, and I'm going to stamp the happy birthday sentiment from that stamp set. And I've prepped it once again with an anti-static powder tool, and then I'm stamping in Versamark ink and using that same alabaster white embossing powder. The reason why I'm doing a black cardstock for this greeting is because I really love the look of like rainbow or very colorful backgrounds with small black accents. I think the black really makes the color stand out. So after that was heat set, I used my tonic guillotine cutter just to trim that really narrow strip out, and then I put some foam adhesive on the back. This is some thin foam strips from Darice, and they're perfect for adhering little itty bitty greetings like this. The card base I'm using today is made out of some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 110-pound cardstock, and I scored that at 5.5 to create a top folding card. taking some Tombow Extreme adhesive, and I'm going to adhere the watercolor piece directly onto the front of the card. So the reason why I didn't have the card base made out of the watercolor paper was for a few reasons. One, my watercolor paper wasn't large enough. If you remember, it came from that 5x7 block. And then also I wanted to have a nice smooth surface on the inside of the card for when I write a message to the recipient of this card. So I just adhered it down to the front of that card and then moved on to the envelope. So for the envelope, I'm using some watercolor paper from Canson. This is some 90-pound watercolor paper. And I like this weight for envelopes because it's much easier to fold than thicker weights. Cut that to 8 1/4 by 8 1/4, which is the size that this envelope punch board tells you to use when you're creating an envelope that will fit an A2 sized card. I then put it into the punch board and lined it up at the measurement of 3 5/8, which is the measurement it tells you. I punched, and then I used that score line all the way up to the punch area. And then I rotated each corner around and lined up that score line with the groove on the opposite side. It's a little bit hard to explain on camera here or something like that, but I've shown this envelope punch board multiple times in videos over the years. So if you look up any other envelope design videos on my YouTube channel or my blog, you'll probably see a few different times when I've shown the envelope punch board. And if you watch it a few times, it'll make a lot more sense. I'm taking the black color from that same watercolor palette and adding some brush strokes on the page or onto the envelope. And then I use some Dr. Peach Martin's Bleed Proof White and an oblique pen holder with a Nico G nib to write on the recipient's name and address. So this card is actually going to Jennifer McGuire. She's awesome card maker and one of my best friends, and her birthday is actually this Wednesday. So I've got to get this in the mail real quick, but go over there and give her a happy birthday for Wednesday. I'm hoping to get this in the mail so she'll receive it in time, but if not, she's going to get a preview of what the card and envelope looks like. So if any of you are wondering about this kind of like red laser line that's going across the envelope, this is actually from a We Are Memory Keepers laser square and matte. I'll have a link in the supply section for this particular tool, but it's absolutely fantastic for lettering, or even if you want to use it for your projects to make sure you get all of your papers and elements or whatever you'd like aligned perfectly straight onto your project. I just like it because it goes across the entire surface area, and I can use it on top of darker surfaces like this where I couldn't really use a light pad or a light box because it wouldn't really work. So I'm just using this white ink. The oblique pen holder is actually from Ash Bush. You can follow her on Instagram and see all of her pens that she sells. They're absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, I just really wanted to make this envelope special by doing some calligraphy for the name and address. I'm using some Express-It tape from Copic to adhere the envelope closed. And I've since discovered that this adhesive isn't quite as strong as I thought it was, so I might switch to a different adhesive like a score tape or something like that. So that is the envelope and the card for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be back very soon with some more cards. Thanks for watching.